MDMA and the SSRIs, though, is a little bit more fleshed out. And I'm going to kind of go back on my rule a little bit, right? Because MDMA and those serotonin blocking antidepressants both increase intrasynaptic serotonin. So earlier in the conversation, I basically said when you mix two drugs that increase intrasynaptic serotonin, you run into a serious toxicity. But that's not the case with MDMA and the antidepressants. And it's because how does MDMA release serotonin? It releases serotonin through that reuptake pump, but the reuptake pump is blocked. So it's kind of like MDMA normally, it's like turning on a faucet and there's serotonin coming out of the faucet. But, you know, with an SSRI on board, there's a plug in the bottom of the sink. The serotonin can't go anywhere. It can't escape. So it essentially falls flat on its face, and it really diminishes the effect. And this is something that they have done a series of probably a half dozen experiments with different serotonin blocking antidepressants. You know, some of them Paxil, some of them citalopram, you know, even an SSRI like Effexor or venlafaxine. And they all just universally greatly diminish the effects of MDMA. So not physically toxic, but we're pretty sure that the MDMA is not going to be that helpful if you were going to assume, right, that the subjective experience is what's helping people, right? Mm-hmm. Which is, I think, a good assumption, but is something that also, you know, people are interested in investigating and, you know, should investigate too.
One thing that had come up, I had interviewed Emmanuel Speros, who was one of the originators of Dance Safe and has been a huge contributor for harm reduction around MDMA use and sort of like advocating for MDMA as a medicine, and MDMA sort of like his whole like hashtag drug positive thing, which is like, yeah, let's reduce harm, but let's also optimize benefits, because the reality is like, yeah, we don't want to get sick and all the rest, but also, you know, we're doing it. You know, if it's outside clinical setting, we're also doing it because we want what's good from it. So let's also just embrace the fact that we can have fun and enjoy ourselves too. Yeah. And he had mentioned, I had said to him that, and this hasn't been a problem recently, so it might have been a time in my life thing, or time in my development thing, which is that I would have MDMA and then I would just be like a wreck for a week, right? Mm-hmm. Be it MDMA toxicity, be it sort of, you know, just like a lack of serotonin, like rebuilding capacity. Mm-hmm. And he had suggested something along the lines of like, for a small set of people, the MDMA gets stuck in the cert gate, which I think is this pump that you were talking about, and doesn't release the same or something like that. So it's basically, I can't refill my levels. And that if I were to take, or, you know, fluoxetine, Prozac, as the MDMA was coming down, that Prozac itself has a higher affinity for that same site. So if there is MDMA in there, it would kick it out and take its place and then stop the MDMA from being able to continue and have an effect. Now, I could be remembering this wrong, so I would love for you to clarify, but is that something that sounds reasonable? Because there is some discussion about how, you know, for people who have a heavy come down from MDMA, whatever it might be, that taking fluoxetine in particular at the end of your role, like as you're, you know, getting ready to go to bed or whatever, might help to mitigate the effects, the after effects of having taken MDMA. Is there any commentary you have on that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that there's not a great, again, there's not a whole lot of like great research, but it does seem that because MDMA and neurotoxicity has been a thing, like, right, and been a controversial thing and been something where I think we've kind of settled on the fact that, well, yeah, MDMA probably is neurotoxic, but again, what dose are you taking and in what kind of context and circumstances? MDMA, when it's mixed with other drugs like alcohol or amphetamine, it seems to increase the neurotoxicity a bit. You know, how is MDMA neurotoxic? Well, some people, it's like it releases serotonin. It's just a gross serotonin releasing effect, right? And so from that perspective, right, if you just added an SSRI after the peak of the experience, you know, maybe that would diminish the amount of serotonin depletion that ultimately happens, and there would be some neuroprotective effect I'm not really convinced that's a great strategy overall, though. I think that, they've done MDMA up to like 187.5 milligrams in some people, 125 and a booster of 62.5 in the clinical trials. And, some people do report some sleep disturbances, some anxiety, some low mood, some difficulty concentrating in the week afterwards, but it seems pretty transient to the week afterwards. And by and large, they're still reporting that their PTSD was a whole lot better. So I've kind of like looked into this MDMA neurotoxicity thing quite a bit, and it seems to me that it's mostly associated with large doses, frequent doses like every weekend, taking the third pill, right? So it seems like kind of like, okay, one and then, a smaller booster. Okay, but you start 1, 2, 3 pills, 4 pills throughout the night. You start stacking these things. You're mixing it with other things like alcohol. Typically MDMA in a recreational or I don't know if there's a typical recreational setting, but let's just say MDMA in a nightlife setting, you're oftentimes staying up very, very late. You're doing it on a Friday, Saturday night. Maybe you're going to bed at a different time during the week. So there's like a huge circadian disruption that's happening from staying up all night as well. And I kind of feel that instead of, well, I'm going to take 3 pills and just take Prozac on my come down, or I'm going to take 3 pills and drink like I normally do, and then in the week afterwards I'm just going to load up on 5-HTP, right? Is another one that's sort of like, well, that could rebuild your serotonin store, so you should supplement 5-HTP afterwards, is like another strategy I hear about. I think more like, well, as pure substance as you can, try to not disrupt your circadian rhythm to the extent you can, absolutely avoid alcohol and other amphetamines with it. And you're probably just not going to land in this place where you're just feeling crummy and in the pits for days and days and days. Could there be some emotional rawness, some more sadness? You took a stimulant, so some post-use fatigue, things like that. Sure. But when, especially, talking about psychedelics and sort of optimizing their benefits, you're usually also talking to people about, well, hey, after you have this big life-changing experience, like maybe you want to not rush into the office right the very next thing the next day. Maybe you want to give yourself some more space there to sort of think about things and feel whatever you're going through. So my sort of like counseling, I guess, or advice around it would be that, yeah, MDMA depletes serotonin. We know from clinical trials that this is not a deal breaker. We know that people still get a whole lot better. We know that it can affect people in the week afterwards. So as you go through this journey and go through this process, you should plan to feel a little lower and you should plan to feel a little raw. And, you should give yourself the space for that to sort of unfold in the few days afterwards. And like, I would rather steer people that route than kind of the route of, well, let's mitigate the risk by adding a Prozac on the back end, or, so I mean,
this makes perfect sense. And then additionally to that, it's like, of course, just take lower doses, and if a person is taking higher doses and going really intensely, like one thing is like, of course, harm reduction is to try to educate people that generally this is not a good idea for multiple reasons. But if someone's taking really big doses of MDMA and messing with their circadians and all the rest, like I get it. I've done that. It's a hell of fun. It's got its benefits, but it also has its drawbacks. And those drawbacks, really, that's not a problem with the MDMA. Right. That's not like, oh, I need to find a way to stop the MDMA from hurting me. It's like, no, I need to consider what it is I'm doing to myself so that I'm not using MDMA to hurt myself, or, prepare myself in a way that I'm willing to deal with the consequences. And like you said, don't recommend it. Maybe Prozac is a way that someone tries to deal with those consequences. But if you're at that point, I think there's a reason to look a lot deeper into yourself about why you're making the choices that you are making.
Yeah. And I mean, hey, like, SSRIs, when you start them, and the counseling in the first week or even the first month is that, well, hey, this drug boosts serotonin. It could give you a little nausea. It could give you a headache. It could give you some insomnia. So it's sort of like, okay, Prozac is also known to be the most activating antidepressant. So it's 3 a.m. You're coming home from your night out, and you want to kind of go to sleep, and the idea is to take this super activating antidepressant that you've never ingested before. I don't know. To me, I can't see it being that great of a strategy.
And fair enough. Like, I might have described this strategy poorly. Based on
It's
memory
out there because MDMA neurotoxicity has been such a thing that there have been people, particularly in rodent experiments, they did this, and they were kind of like Prozac protects against the neurotoxicity of MDMA, and then I think some people sort of extrapolated from that kind of preclinical rodent data and was kind of like, well, I'm going to start doing this because, I go out every single weekend. I'm a DJ, and I, take MDMA very frequently, and often take, 300-400 milligrams in a night. And so I think I need it, right?